when you go back and look at where inflation was in January of 22, prior to Russia crossing one border, Ukraine, we were at 7.5%, and now we're at 9.1% again year over year for the month of June. So if you assume Russia added all that inflation, maybe they've added, let's call it 260 basis points of inflation. 160 basis points of inflation. That's obviously Russia has not caused all that inflation. So there very clearly is a legitimate inflation problem in the U.S. economy. Again, a ton of inflation domestically, and that's further supported by core services inflation being at 8%. Russia has very little to do with our services inflation, our housing bubble that the Fed and the fiscal government for effectively created in the pandemic era. But going back to the sort of the specific impact of inflations, I think it's really difficult to sort of draw a one-to-one, these are very dynamic, impossible to model ecosystems, right? It's almost like the butterfly effect to some degree. But one thing we can sort of do is sort of a cross-sectional analysis to sort of understand kind of the relative impact of something like sanctions, right? We'll never be able to know what the actual true basis point amount of sanctions are, but we can look at something like the spread between U.S. inflation relative to the rest of the developed world's inflation. And right now, if you factor in the most recent print, we're somewhere around 160, 170 basis points higher than the rest of the world's developed world, the Western world's inflation rates. That's in the 95th percentile of all readings going back as far back as we can get the data, 50, 60, 70 years. And so it's telling you that there are inflationary pressures in the U.S. economy that are very much separate and apart from things like sanctions, et cetera, which are obviously impacting everyone.